So before we begin, a huge thank you to TANGZU for giving us a chance to actually host a review in Malaysia so that we can let every audiophile here to test out the Fudu, and as well as for us to, share our thoughts about it. Again, this will be very, very unfiltered. If it sucks, it sucks. If it's good, it's good. But with all that being said, let's actually begin. Okay, before we begin, two important things. If I look cranky, it's because technically before this, I finished filming for 40 minutes and my file got corrupted. I think I probably mentioned this a few times already. I think it's probably my SD card failing on me, so probably should change my SD card. But the second thing, the TANGZU FUDU, Tufu, right? Technically, the reason why it is called Fudu in English is because in Chinese, we have our surnames in front. That is why it is Tuf. I'm not here to lecture you on Chinese history or anything like that, but I think there is one thing that I could mention that I'll talk about. Who is Fudu? Because technically I just realized that it is actually a politician from the Tang Dynasty, and hence I guess that is why there is no emphasis on this box. Compared to what we have before, this box is very sleek, very minimal. It doesn't really have anything going on other than very light gray brushstrokes, I would say. Watercolor type of brush. Very simple box, nothing else. And y'all know my shtick. It's unboxing time. And for people who want to go to the sound part, just go to the sound part. I have put the time here. Now, again, very simple box. Once you slide it out, you are being greeted with a TANGZU X Divinus. So yeah, quite nice, straight to the point. And it opens up like an iPhone box. Opening it up, you are being greeted with the IEMs in the middle, a little bit off center. The reason why is because you have two accessories with you. We'll talk about the IEMs later, so let's just get over with the accessories first. Starting off with the pouch, the case. Apparently this place says case. I feel conflicted, man. This case honestly looks very nice to the point where you touch it. That's when you feel like, what happened? Wow, I'm sorry for saying this, TANGZU. I really am sorry for once. Every time I say I want to be unfiltered, but this feels awful, man. This case feels awful. Like, I'd rather if you give me something I'd rather if you give me something like this, like at least it's a hard case rather than this. Like, don't get me wrong, this honestly looks nice. The zipper honestly feels very solid. Everything is okay, but the feeling of it, man, the feeling of it is a little bit off. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't know. This thing just doesn't rub me around. Maybe I'm just a little bit biased because, or maybe because I'm a little bit biased because I have some leather products. So yeah, take that as you will. But anyways, let's talk about the next thing that comes in tangent with the case, which is the cable. Now this thing right here is made of OFC, as said by Limso. And one thing I'd like to mention is that even though this is a stock cable, as you can see, it looks a little bit, stock. Yeah, it looks stock. The one good thing about this cable that I can mention right now is that definitely it does not have microphonics. So for people who are using this constantly and on about, I can vouch for you that me personally using this, I don't really feel any microphonics. So that's good. And one more thing is definitely also it looks aesthetically pleasing. You have a gunmetal splitter, you have a gunmetal 2-pin, but the most interesting part is definitely the fact that it has a balance output. Like honestly, I really don't notice that much IEMs that come in 4.4 at this range. I mean, it might be slowly getting more and more common, like let's say the Lashua S12 back then, so on and so forth. I don't really know, I'm sorry. But my point being is that maybe this might be a concern for certain people who actually, just don't have balance and they just want 3.5 and they just want a good pair of earphones. They got you covered though. This thing not only comes in 4.4 but also in 3.5 as stock, so y'all are safe for people who know about this. The other side of the accessory box shows you two types of tips, the Tangshan and also the Divinus, which is the collab of TANGZU with Divinus, where they give very soft, very comfortable tips. And me personally, I will talk about the tip a little bit in tangent with the sound later, because it is very, very let's just say that this IEM is quite tip dependent. Talking about the IEMs, let's actually go into the main part of this review, which is talking about the IEMs. Now, in terms of the build, it really is at the top of the line. I would say it is quite solid for the price. It feels quite nice in the hand overall. Nothing really much I can complain about. It is made out of resin type of body, semi-translucent type, so definitely you can see a little bit of the guts, a little bit of the inners. Looks quite nice, man. It looks quite nice. Other than that, you also have a metal nozzle and some sort of aluminum, either aluminum alloy or like metal faceplate up here with a very specific and quite special design. It is curved, but then again it ends with a triangle facet in the middle, where the left side says Divinus and the right side, the right side says TANGZU. So yeah, and the one thing that you notice from the moment that you grab it is that, wow, not only is it solid, it feels very light and it has a very small form factor. How light? There's only 4.05 grams. So definitely when you are wearing this, you will definitely not feel it after a while. I have worn this for 2 hours in one sitting last night and it feels like I didn't really even wear it, to be honest. That's how I feel about it, because usually whatever IEMs that I wear, once you hit the 1.5 hour mark, once you hit the 2 hour mark, even though the IEM is light, even though it is resin, it's still, you know, you get that slight uncomfortableness of it. This thing does not have it. So props to them for actually having such a good design and also such a small form factor. I'm pretty sure this form factor also owes a lot to its fit, because the fit, honestly, very, very top notch. I have nothing much to say about it. This fits perfectly in my ear. And with all that being said, let's actually talk about the sound. Now, in terms of the sound, like I mentioned just now, we are going to talk a little bit about the tips in relation to the sound. This is the source I use, and notice one thing, I specifically use the Divinus tips, and this is where it really is very relevant to my review, this video. The TANGZU is not really that compatible with the Divinus in my opinion. Why? Because this is the graph. Now, look at the graph. It has, in general, a very V-shaped tuning, not very, but it's standard V-shaped tuning, but with more boosted bass, a higher bass shelf, and as you can see in the mids, it's a little bit recessed. Now, the reason why the Divinus is a better compatible tip to this, and this is coming from a guy that doesn't really tip roll that much. This is because, from my understanding of tip rolling, because the Divinus is a little bit more short nozzle compared to the TANGZU balance, that is probably why when I wear the Divinus, everything sounds more forward, everything sounds more intimate. Where when I wear the TANGZU, I don't know, man, it feels a little bit too recessed for me. So with all that being said, when I talk about the mids and the highs, please remember the fact that I use a Divinus. Now, in terms of the bass, I would say this is probably the best part about this IEM, because you definitely see a few people mentioning that this is quite a musical pair. Why do you say that it's musical? Definitely because I would say it owes a lot to the bass. Now, hip-hop, specifically hip-hop, 808 sounds very bouncy, it has that slight rubbery feel to it, and overall it is quite plentiful, but it doesn't clip, it doesn't have that bloatiness to it. Well, actually I lied, it has a little bit, but my main point is that it becomes more of a coloration of the bass rather than, you know, actually clipping too much to the point where it bass bleeds all over. So 808 sound very good. Sub bass rumbles, honestly, it goes quite low to the point where I notice sub bass in certain songs that I did not notice before. Case in point, Perfect Mac Miller. It's when he goes something along the lines of, but it ain't perfect, but I don't mind, because it's worth it. That specific part, when the lowest of the low sub bass hits, I'm like, wait, there's sub bass in here before? I'm quite surprised by the bass, is what I'm saying. This pair is good. And other than that, bass lines, even though it has some slight bloatiness, some slight roundness to the whole bass region, the good part about this is that the bass line is surprisingly good in the tone definition, and you are able to hear almost all the licks quite perfectly. Probably not the best resolution, it's still very distinguishable note by note, so everything is good. And this is where I have this one statement where I'm probably gonna get flamed or even criticized by a few people that I know. How do I put this? It is because of the fact that this thing has a good separation and good soundstage that this pair of IEMs does not really have a very obvious bass bleed. Strictly speaking, it might have a little bit, but the separation makes it feel like it's separated so good to the point where I don't feel like it muddies up the mids and the treble. I said it. It has good separation and good soundstage. Well, relative to the price, I said it. I know a lot of people have said this thing is trash in terms of the soundstage. Me personally, I feel like it's still average for the price. It's still decent. It's still good. I'll talk about that in a minute because the mids and the highs are going to be very fast to be talked about. Because why? I feel like the mids and the highs are a little bit underwhelming in terms of what it carries. Not underwhelming to the point where I'm like, no, don't buy this. It's like, it's tunes quite safe to the point where I don't feel like there's that much things to talk about. The mids, I could talk about the vocals. Male vocals are definitely slightly more recessed compared to female vocals, and overall, it sounds a little bit more musky. It sounds more analog. Female vocals overall are quite bright. They are quite sparkly. No, not really that bright, but you get the idea. It's sparkly, it's luscious, it's smooth. There is no form of sibilance when I'm listening to J-pop, so I guess this thing passes the J-pop test. And I guess the tonality of the female vocals are a little bit more, I guess I'll use the word natural. Instruments, I don't feel like there's anything that's special. Everything sounds quite balanced in terms of its dynamicness. Everything sounds good. Overall, I'll just say that it's strong, but it's laid back due to the fact that you can see in the mids, it's a little bit more recessed than, you know, the usual type of mids. And this trait actually carries to the upper mids and the treble. But one specific thing that I'd like to mention is that I feel like the Foleys, the micro details, all the things that are in the mids, the upper mids, and the trebles really stand out in this pair for some reason. I don't know how to say this, but it is not overworking itself, but it just does it just right. Like, because I mentioned that the mids are quite balanced in terms of how everything presents itself, that also includes the micro details, which we'll talk about later in the technicalities. Now, the reason why I say this whole thing doesn't really have that much some uniqueness that I'd like to mention in this part of the video is because of the fact that this overall IEM, once you hit the treble region, you kind of understand why. It sounds a little bit dark. It has a dark sound to the point where everything's relaxed, but you definitely will know that this is a little bit of a dark tuning is what I would want to say. Overall, everything sounds laid back, but it still has that strongness to it. It still is able to emphasize when it needs to be emphasized. Something along the lines of maybe talking about guitar shreds from Polyphia. Everything still shreds quite good. The resolution is still okay, but it does not really have that very edginess to it. It doesn't sound too sharp. Everything is very laid back, I would say. Mids, I would say maybe it might be carrying a little bit to that, but then again, in most cases, mids are a little bit, you know, recessed, so it's very hard to determine that. I don't feel like I have the experience to determine that yet, but I can confidently say that this is a little bit dark on the upper mids and the treble region. For drums, hi-hats, snares, rides, all those, definitely again sounds dark. It sounds natural, but everything just sounds a little bit more rounded and more rough on the edges. And in terms of treble extension, I feel like it's normal. I don't really have that much to talk about if you're asking me right now. Now, with all that being said, let's actually talk about the technicalities, which all of y'all, no, not all of y'all, probably just a few people will be a little bit funny with me, thinking that TANGZU probably paid me money to say this. But I really find the soundstage to be quite decent in this pair. I don't know why a lot of people have been saying that the soundstage on this is trash. As it is, because I use the M15 a lot, even though my source, I specifically state that I use the M15, I have tried this directly plugging it into my laptop. It still sounds okay. It sounds quite decent. I would say compared to the M15, the soundstage definitely decreases a little bit, somewhere along the lines of like 10 to 15%. I have an analogy in terms of why people are saying that this is a very narrow IEM. I actually forgot to mention this. I feel like Fudu in general is also quite a transparent IEM in terms of like, it really shows you how producers mix their stuff. Because I feel like in terms of just now what I mentioned during the male vocals, the female vocals part, it still owes a lot to how the track is being mixed, how the person's voice is being recorded on what mic, how is it processed, so on and so forth. People will say that this is narrow. I can only relate it in one certain instance. Whenever there are choruses in songs, because if you actually looked into my channel, you know I also do songs, I also make songs, it's just a hobby anyways. But my point is that during the chorus, a lot of people have this type of mixing where my vocal will be split into two and I put one on the left, one on the right, and you know, it suddenly feels like there's two people talking beside your ear. And depending on how good the IEM is, it might either sound like it's coming from two directions, or two people are literally shouting in your ear or something like that. In this case, in very certain tracks, or I guess in more tracks than one, there definitely is that sort of experience. But me personally, I am a very vocal centric person, so I feel like I quite enjoy it. It doesn't really feel that shouty for me, even though for most people they feel like it's a little bit too forward, hence why people are saying that it's a little bit narrow. I can't really deny the fact that maybe because of its prowess for this part lacks, that's why people say that its soundstage sucks. Or maybe I'm just biased because, like I say, I'm a very vocal centric person. But yeah, bottom line, I still feel like this thing controls everything quite well. It has width, probably not that much depth, but the weird thing comes into play when I talk about depth, because usually having more depth means that you can layer things more, you have more separation. But for this pair specifically, or again, maybe I'm just using the M15, the bass, like I mentioned just now, it has minimal bass bleed to little bass bleed. Why I say that is because even though I can hear the bass going over certain things, it does not blend together. It still has that very, very, you know, definitive border in between. That's why I say it has good separation just now in the bass region. But yeah, that's how I feel about it. Dynamics is a standard V-shape IEM with slightly recessed mids and up. Is it good? Definitely good, but you know, it's $89 US. Is it as good as a Clinical Dawn? Definitely not, man. I still miss the Clinical Dawn. And last but not least, I guess I'll talk about detail retrieval, which for me personally, I feel like it's strong, but for me personally, I feel like there's certain things to that. There's certain things that are being put into play and like complement each other. Because this thing, again, like I mentioned, it has a dark tuning, a slightly dark tuning. Because of this, many elements in the track are being lowered, but at the same time, the micro details are probably still, you know, retained right here. So that's probably why the micro details can shine a little bit more. Despite, like I said, this thing is a little bit dark sounding. So quite laid back. I would say the best analogy I could give you is that if the triple with melee is probably not really that warm, is what I would say. It's still laid back, but it's not as laid back or warm as the triple with melee. And with all that being said, what are my final thoughts on the TANGZU FUDU? Why did I flail this around? I'm very tired. If I were to give it a score from 1 to totally not okay, 5 is being neutral, I don't love it, I don't hate it, and 10 being absolute must, this thing goes around, I guess, a 6.5, a very solid 6.5. Regardless of what I've said here in the video, if you guys have a chance, definitely go and test IEMs out. We here as reviewers are just here to help you guys get an idea on how this IEM sound. Me personally, a very quick recap again. Bass is very amazing, very dynamic. Mids and up, quite transparent to the mix. The vocals in general for male will be a little bit more rustic, a little bit analogy. Female vocals more bright, more shiny, more smooth, more luscious, and a little bit more forward than, you know, the males. Instruments overall sound very strong, but quite laid back. And as it goes further up the treble region, definitely everything sounds a little bit more dark. Mainly because if you again look at the graph, which I'll pull up right here, you'll see on the 8K region and up, it just slopes down. Which, you know, conventionally in most cases, most people still have like some peaks at, you know, post 10K and such. So this thing definitely does not really have that much airiness to it. Or in fact, not really that much at all. And going on to the technicalities, everything is on par. The soundstage part, I don't really know how to tell you. It's really not that bad. It's still quite adequate, okay? Let me put this clearly to you. I'm giving you a service, TANGZU FUDU. A lot of people are trashing you for your soundstage. I wholeheartedly, unbiasedly tell everybody that the soundstage is actually decent, okay? It's actually decent. Don't believe me? Go and try it. But if you still feel like it's trash, maybe my ears are trash, I don't know, man. But anyways, that is it. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Please don't corrupt.